Good morning. Isn't Jesus wonderful? So, last week we looked at the cherubim, and we've spent a fair amount of time on them over the course of the last year, on and off, hitting when they come up. And so, I don't want to retread any more than I have to, but we'll go a little further into them this week, for the last time, I promise, and then move on. So, these guys show up quite a bit in the Bible, more than probably any of the other spirits specifically. They are pretty unique. They have a very important role in heaven and in Scripture. They've been quite an influence here on earth as well, and we don't always think about that. I want to explore this a little bit first before we go into the scriptural appearances of angels. I wanted to get these roles out of the way before we got into the scriptural appearances so that you knew who we were actually looking at and, what they were and what each of that meant. Because depending on which shows up will kind of change your view on the specific appearances, right? Oh, this must be really important if so-and-so. So, normally, we always look at scripture first, but this week, I want to start with the world's view a bit, how it used to be. So these guys are very odd, and they are usually multi-faced, like we talked about. And like I said, it's not to say that this is not what they look like, but like we talked about, they need to convey their role, their power, their authority in this reality, and it doesn't translate well to our minds. And so those things that are part of their character and their personhood get converted into physical attributes. And so they look weird to us because it's how it's being conveyed, right? Okay. So because they're trying to push Jesus in everything they do, God's work. So let's look again at how they're described. So here's a picture with all four of them, like we showed last week, with all four of the faces together on one. And that's possible, right? That's one way to look at it. There is evidence that sometimes they show up with individual ones, okay? And so, again, you have the four. It could go either way. But there's one I really want to focus on because this one seems to have come out in the front, and that is the ox. This guy shows up a lot. And if you look at him, you think ox, but the word for ox in Hebrew is shor. And it means ox, but it also means cow, and it also means bull. So we often see it with this head. But what does this remind you of in the world, in myth? The Minotaur, okay? Greek mythology, we have the Minotaur. Now, the Minotaur was one thing. There wasn't like a bunch of them. There was one in the myth. And it was the son of Pasiphae, who was the wife of King Minos, the daughter of Helios, a.k.a. Apollo, the Greek god that the Bible will connect to Satan. The father was an actual bull, a snow white bull that was sent as a sacrifice to Zeus. Poseidon thought that Minos had betrayed him, cursed his wife to fall in love with a bull. So the kid's a minotaur. King Minos was not very happy about this. He locks him away in what's called the labyrinth. Giant maze, nobody could figure out if they were mortal. Because there was an exit, but if you were mortal, you couldn't see it. And so the Minotaur would just kill whoever comes into his area, and that was the little punishment. Every 9 years, he would force the people of the city to produce 7 of their choice, 7 noble men and 7 noble women that would be sent as essentially a sacrifice down to the labyrinth, to the Minotaur. That's what they did. This was the thought. He eventually is killed by a guy named Theseus. If you've ever read or watched the Odyssey or Theseus and the Minotaur at some point, then you know this story. Theseus is a major player in a lot of forms of media, everything from Shakespeare to the movie Immortals, played by Henry Cavill. and everything in between, including video games, poems, operas, stories, you name it. It's become a pretty popular one. The myth becomes in our minds. This is the excuse, okay? So these are the myths. So when the Bible and Christians believe about these things, where do they come from? These myths. That's the excuse. These are myths that people have just come up with, fancy ways to explain what they don't understand. Not that, they stole it from another source and corrupted it. No. Simply, we made it up. And now we just believe it's true. One that you don't get to see very often is the next one, which is the winged version. This one is considered a modern reinterpretation. I promise this all has a point. Modern reinterpretation of this creature. But it's not. Because the original version looked like this. And it was called the Lamassu. Now notice it's just the full bull with wings, okay? You're going to start noticing this. So these themes. And it's important to see these themes. So this bull has wings. A winged bull, or you might call him a red bull, even. No? Okay. Well, anyway. So, plain and simple, it's a bull head, right? Bull body, calf feet, wings. That's an interesting motif to choose. I wonder where he comes from. So this comes from Mesopotamia and Persia. Here's the Persian version up there. Okay? And this will start showing up. Now this might look familiar to you. This has changed. And you've got the Assyrian, Sumerian, and Babylonian version here too. Okay? So you might have seen it. If we go to the next one, that's how they were built. They built them outside their temples, and they were used as guardians for the temple. Okay? This is what they believe. It's going to start sounding really familiar after a while to what we just read. So, if this looks familiar, it's because of this. The Sphinx. You start noticing themes. Okay? So, the merger of human and lion features. Then, we go to the Greek version of the same creature, the Sphinx. And you'll notice the tail looks a little different. It doesn't look like a lion tail, does it? It looks a little more like a snake, maybe. So we go to the next one. And it's called a chimera. And this is what comes from that concept. Now, you have a mix. Goat and snake/dragon, because the term is actually mixed in most cultures. There's not much of a difference between them until the medieval time separates them more. And of course, the lion with eagle features. So how many we got? 1, 2, 3, 4. Next one. Again, now it takes on some new forms. This one changes it a bit because sometimes they're shown as evil. The chimera, by the time the Greeks come around, they make them evil creatures. And here you got the lion, the goat, the snake. Over there you've got a dragon, so you've got some dragon wings. Make it a little evil. They like it that way. And sometimes that's used for stories. But this is the cultural shift that has occurred over time. Okay? So, I can't help but notice that this version would benefit the devil a little bit, simply because you have a lot of his motifs here. And anything of that symbolism that he can identify with the coming world leader, the Antichrist, is going to benefit him because it's going to tie in the minds of the cultures back to these myths. And he is the answer to all of these things in their minds. So this is very similar to what's called an Apkallu. I don't have a picture for you this time, but a Phoenician Assyrian myth. And these were the main deities around Nineveh during Daniel's time, during Jonah's time. Jonah never wanted to go to Nineveh. It's the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and they hated the Jews. They hated them. Okay? They had fun finding new ways to torture the Jewish people. They were like the Nazis of the time, so to speak. Okay? So They believed in these guys called Apkalus. They had 7 of them, so they thought. And they had 4 main appearances. They had a man with wings, interesting choice, a guy with an eagle head, a guy with a fish head, and a guy who wore a fish head. He just wore it like a big skin, like a big fish. He just wears the scales. I don't know. He wants to be the fish guy. I don't know. So this is actually what people later confuse for Dagon of the Philistines, and then they start thinking he's a fish god. But that was not Dagon. So there's supposed to be 7 of these guys, and this is what's interesting. What you'll find is how often they don't lie. So their job, they said, was to deliver messages for their masters, the gods, who lived in the earth. They were exiled there after the flood, which they flat out tell you, because they gave information to humans, and the God of heaven didn't like that. Akkadians have a very similar story, where their gods are older than the moon, and they lived on a different planet. God exiled them. The God of heaven exiled them. They hide here because he was upset with them, destroyed their planet, and sent them here. Recurrent themes. But all these ancient ones have very similar stories. Now, it's interesting what they admit to. It is an accurate statement, even if they just twist it to their benefit. They twist it to make themselves the victims and the heroes. Very narcissistic, classic behavior. It's not exactly true. It was knowledge that man was never supposed to know, and it violates the terms and conditions. So God shut down their warranty. I mention all these guys because they're all the same influence, and we'll start to draw the dots. And I'm going to connect some dots you've probably never seen. So this is where it gets interesting. So there's Lamassu that I showed you, also known as the Shedu in Assyrian culture, where we started. They all looked about the same. And they shared many of the traits of Ezekiel's description of cherubim. But I want to take a look at something else real quick. Keep that in mind. So if we look at Psalms 22. Now most people don't know this, but David was considered a prophet. We don't think of him as prophet, we think of him as king and warrior, but he was considered a prophet. Peter affirms this in his sermon in Acts 2, that he was a prophet. In the Jewish mind, he was a king and a prophet. And the reason he did this is because he did prophesy, and he shared words from the Lord. And the words he shared are beyond impressive. They ranged from think about the Psalms. They ranged from words about how the Lord will fight for you, how he loves you, how he provides for you and your family, how he protects you, he forgives you, he establishes you, on and on and on. Psalms 23 is written all about how God is there for you, right, through all your dark times. Psalms 1 is how God guides and establishes our path, and how we should love his law because it's for our benefit. But they also include some very impressive things. Psalms 2, for instance, gives you a conversation between the 3 members of the Trinity. Did you know this? I've mentioned it once before, but in Psalms 2, some people split it slightly differently, but it's the same segments. 1 through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 9, 10 through 12. Okay? 1 through 3 is the voice of the people on earth. 4 through 6 is the Father's response. 7 through 9 is the Son's response, and 10 through 12 is the Holy Spirit's response. And you can read what they think. This is taking place at Armageddon, what we call Armageddon. We'll get to that in the Bible, in Revelation. This is them talking. This is crossing quite a time gap for David to know this. But it's not the only time he does this. This is man's rebellion and rage against the Messiah and his people. Well, in Psalm 22, David does something pretty amazing. He actually hears the words of Jesus, the thoughts of Jesus, while he's on the cross. He writes them down, but the source isn't really revealed at the time, because remember, no one knew the plan. And if the devil had known the plan, Jesus never would have been crucified. So it's purposely hidden so that the enemy can't know too early. But I want us to read it. We're only going to read a portion of it. I want you to take time and read the whole thing. I think it goes past this. I personally think Psalm 23 and 24 are also part of this. It's Jesus' thoughts and then how he actually comforts himself in the Word of God. Now, some say Jesus quoted the psalm. That's their take. He simply quoted what he knew David had written. I'll show you why there's problems with that. He's quoting it only because David's quoting him. So if we start in verse 1, to the chief musician set to the deer of the dawn, a psalm of David. My God, why have you forsaken me? Where have we heard that before? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season I am not silent. You are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted you. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried to you, they were delivered. They trusted in you, and you were not ashamed. But I am a worm, and no man, a reproach of men, and despised by the people. All who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip, they shake their heads, saying, he trusted in the Lord, let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. This is what they said to him on the cross. But you are he who took me out of the womb. You made me trust while on my mother's breast. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb. You have been my God. Be not far from me. My trouble is near, for there is none to help. Remember, this is while he's on the cross, and he has taken on sin, and God has to turn. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouth like a raging, roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Now, all of that happened. There's no way he's just quoting David. David's quoting him. It's simply stunning. Crucifixion did not exist in David's time. He wouldn't have known what it was. He couldn't have described it. At this point in time, and if you know this, crucifixion started with what we call impalement. You took somebody and you had a really sharp pole and you stuck it in the ground, and then you got them up there and dropped them. And how they fell is how they stuck. And you left them like that until they died. If you read the book of Esther, and we talk about Haman's plot, right? And he wants to get Mordecai killed and all the Jews killed. And the idea was he'd hang him in the gallows. Well, that's not exactly what it is. They didn't have them back then. Gallows, the word there is es, meaning tree. Hung on a tree. This is why Moses put the snake on a pole and not on a cross. It was a symbol that wasn't known yet. It hadn't developed into a cross. The punishment almost diverges. They stop doing one and switch to the other, but then the other comes back. But thanks to the Messiah, we see the link, because he draws the link for us. Haman had, you have to consider this, Haman had an impalement site built in his backyard. This is how sick he was. So that when Mordecai was killed, he was stuck up on that spike. And every morning, Haman would be able to drink his coffee and watch the body rot. That's what was going on. It was left as a symbol, just like crucifixion was, where the body was up there, so that it was a warning. Don't cross us. Okay? David never knew about crucifixion. It's about a 400-year gap. The Carthaginians pick it up, and they turn it into a more torturous thing. The Romans perfect it, and they really do, because they could keep a person alive on there up to 10 days. Yet, what David is saying, he's talking about the dehydration, he's talking about the disjointment that comes, he's talking about the actual nails piercing the hands and feet. These are things he could not have known. David couldn't have known about this. Only a first-hand account could have told him this. Plus, he knows the words of Jesus. As amazing as this is, one phrase always bugged me. Because Jesus thinks the thoughts, the bulls of Bashan have encompassed me, or surrounded me. And that's a weird phrase. What is he talking about? Snakes make sense, right? Vipers. He uses that reference. So that made sense. Bulls is a weird one. There must be an alternate meaning, and it took me years to finally track this down. And it was only thanks to others' research. So if we look from purely agricultural terms, bulls of Bashan is stupid. They didn't have bulls. Okay, Bashan, if you remember, we talked about Bashan. It's a valley. They grew crops, but they didn't have bulls. They had no grazing ground for that. They wouldn't have been known for them, and they certainly wouldn't have been strong. So this is never a thing in history. So he's not talking about that. And what's interesting is most scholars agree that this is a supernatural term. This is a supernatural reference, not a literal bull being talked about. Well, if that's the case, then we have to find what it means, which means we have to figure out what the supernatural term could mean. The Hebrews have no such term to explain this. This is not a view of theirs. So we have to look at the Canaanites, specifically those from Bashan, the Bashanites, Bashanites, whatever, to explain this. All right. So this links to the feast. I know. Feast of Israel. You think I'm jumping all over. I promise I'm not. The Feast of Israel. We're all experts here in the feast, right? So I don't have to explain them all. So I won't put this up. This is a calendar I made. This is how their year works. Okay? They have 7 months. The feasts are divided with 3 in the first month and 3 in the last month and 1 in the middle, which is very much like the design of the menorah. So the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles we usually call it in Hebrew, is Sukkot. It is a 7-day festival. It begins on the 15th of Tishri, the 7th month of their 7-month calendar. Now, they have 2 calendars, and this is where people get mistaken in biblical chronology. They have 2 calendars. They have a civil calendar, and they have a religious calendar. When God tells them to do his Passover in Egypt, he says, this will start your calendar. So one calendar starts in the first month. One calendar actually starts in what would be the last month. Okay? This changes things because you have to know which one we're talking about, which calendar they're using when they do their chronologies. It actually does matter. Now, this, along with Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost as we call it, together, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Hag HaMatzot, together with Passover, they are 6 months from Sukkot. Those are the 3 pilgrimage feasts, they call them. Every able-bodied Jew has to attend these 3 every year. It didn't matter where you lived. You have to pack up, take your own, and go there, at least the men. Okay? So you can imagine how many people were in the city at any of these festivals. Millions, literally. So this is what's funny. So you're dealing with so many people. This is why when Mary and Joseph from the city, you realize how many people are in this city. They have no room in the inn, literally, because they're booked because of the census and the festivals. So this combined, I say combined because the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread hits, then Passover, and then a 2-day skip, and then the Feast of First Fruits. But those 2 are a day apart. One day you do unleavened bread, and the very next day you have the Passover meal, which is actually part of a set. They roll them together. Many times they treat it as one, okay? Because you got to be in town for one, so you just stay. So everybody's there for the Passover. That's why I roll them together, okay? So this is how this works. Now, interestingly, the pagan world had a feast called an Akitu. And that dates to about the 3rd millennium BC. And it is considered the New Year festival for them to honor Marduk, who was the Mesopotamian or Babylonian head god. Originally, they thought there was just one. Turns out there was two. They had one in the spring, one in the fall. The oldest known one was in Sumer, the home city of the god of sin, which we talked about because he's the young bullock that they worshiped. So when the Israelites go into the valley, it specifically says they were in the valley of sin. That's the God you're talking about. And they built a golden calf. Why? Because that was sin, a young bull. And so they thought Moses was dead. He never came back down. There was a bunch of fire and lightning, and they figured they needed help. So they turned to one of the other gods that they actually learned about in Egypt, because they didn't learn about strictly Egyptian gods. These Akitu festivals began on what to the Jews would be the 1st of Tishri and the 1st of Nisan, and they lasted 11 to 12 days depending on the time period in history. So the Jewish festival started a few days after your pagan Akitu festivals ended, almost like God wanted to respond to them. Sukkot is a 7-day feast because God is complete and so is the feast. It's very interesting when you look at the sacrifices. I got a list. This is sacrifices that are required for this feast. 7 days, right? This is what's required to be sacrificed every day for 7 days. That's a lot of animals, number one. In fact, PETA would have serious problems if the temple was active again. Oh my gosh, they'd flip out. The amount of animals that would be killed. They had, if you read carefully, they had trenches built, several of them coming out of the temple, for all the blood that had to drain because of all the animals that had to be killed. They were almost doing this every day, killing animals. So up here, because this was sacrifices, had to be made for people. So this is a feast. Unleavened bread did the same thing, but they only had one ram every day and only 7 lambs every day, half the number. This makes Sukkot unique. Why? Why so many bulls? Why bulls at all? That's an odd one if you think about it. I mean, we're used to the idea of lambs, right? Israel sacrificed lambs. Yeah, sure. We know that one. We know that Israel sacrifices rams. We know about turtle doves for the poor. We know about the options. Bulls is a weird one. Goats make sense. The bull, my point in all this, the bull takes on a very special role. For some reason, out of all of the creatures, out of all the variants from the cherubim, the bull gets the attention. That one keeps showing up. You've got all the other animals, you got a good mix. So if we look at the animals like the chimera and the various gods I showed you, you've got a lion. Now the lion is the king of beasts, right? Jesus is represented by the lion. Why? Because he's a king, right? Satan tries to steal this one. Shocking, I know. He tries to steal this one by going around, you know this phrase, as a roaring lion. He isn't one, but he likes to act like one. He's like a dog on a chain barking. He likes to try to scare you. He can't do anything, but he can scare you. He's pretty limited because unless God lets him do something, there's nothing he or his minions can do. And if God allows it, well, then you know it's for your benefit. So He's trying to act like one. He's trying to scare you. The goat was already used symbolically, but Satan stole that one too, didn't he? It's used in the Baphomet. You got the goat-headed guy. Pan, which is also linked with Satan, it's half goat, right? So we stole that one. Now the snake dragon, well, that's easy. He didn't have to steal that one. That one was pretty much given to him. Like, no, that's bad. Literally, the nicest idiom in the Bible of a snake is when it's put on a pole and is used symbolically of Jesus taking the place of sin. That's the nicest you get. The Bible's not very nice to certain animals, dogs included. Not very nice to them. Some animals are very nice to. It's not nice to those. So it simply meant sin being judged. So you have to understand, they don't know what that meant. Even though the demons got that idiom, they didn't know what that meant. They knew the Messiah would come, and they knew the people's expectations of the Messiah to throw off the rulers and raise Israel up, right? But they knew that their judgment was coming. So this gave them an automatic kind of fear and aversion to the Messiah because they didn't know what he was going to do. They expected him to come in and just wipe the floor with them. So they kind of probably stayed out of his way. You remember the response of the demoniac of Gadara, right? Where he's like, don't send us into the abyss. It's not our time. Because that's what they're expecting. They're expecting him to come in and just get rid of them all. Now, the eagle is an all-God image. You don't see it outside of that in the Bible. Birds, generically, not treated well in the Bible. The eagle is, because the eagle is used of God. He uses this reference over and over and over again. And wings, there are specifically eagle's wings when they're talked about, but they're wings, and that's kind of generic. So you don't really need stealing there. It's kind of used both, right? Okay. The bull, however, was not innately one or the other. All right? The bull was used of God's sin. Now, some may argue, yes, but all animals are used of a god somewhere. Yeah, but the bull was something special. The Minotaur, the Titans, Kronos, a tribe called the Ditnu tribe, the Canaanite god El. The Akkadians even believed that the god of chaos, Tiamat, he's a dragon. He represents chaos. He fights Marduk. And this fight goes from creation to Armageddon, of Marduk trying to conquer chaos, okay? They believed he was served by demons known as the Kusariku, which means bison men. Now, they looked a little different because they looked like the ones the Persians had, where it was a bull body, human head. Actually, it was a lot like a kintar. So you had like a upper half of a man and a bull, okay? Or just the bull head. Very much like Pan or a kintar that wasn't a horse. The Kisariku were defeated by the god Ninurta, and this is associated with the Amorite tribe, the Ditnu tribe. They're associated with bulls. I'm not going to belabor you with all the history. Some people are already like, shut up, Stu. Okay, so just humor me here. Now, we have to skip a lot. So, in Sumerian, there's a word, alim. And this is the word that equates to Ditnu in the Akkadians. Both of these words mean bull or bison. Okay? The Kisariku that word becomes Gud Alim in Sumerian, which means bison man. Okay? Almost the lamest superhero ever invented, I think, after Kite Man, Calendar Man, Condiment King, and Paste Pot Pete. I wish I were making those up. I'm not. But this guy's associated with the sun, the bison man, not Paste Pot Pete. He just squirts glue. And his head has its own image called the Sig-Alim, or Sag-Alim, meaning emblem of Utu, which is their sun god. So Bison Man's full name is Gud-Dumu Utu, meaning the bison, son of the sun. Or also Gud-Dumu Anna, meaning the bison, son of heaven. This is a motif we've heard, both in pagan culture and in the Bible. The sun god is already one of Satan's preferred monikers by the Greek period. He is aligned with Apollo. So again, we have an association between the sun god and these bulls. Okay? Just like the Greeks, way before them. Dagon, the god taken on by the Greek immigrants known as the Philistines, was an underworld god, god of the harvest, not a fish. No fish, he was not a fish god. One of these Akatu feasts, called Zukru, was celebrated in Syria at the time of the Judges. On the first day of the feast, when the moon is full, Dagon, who was the supreme god of Syria, and all of the gods of his pantheon were taken out of the temple and into the presence of the people to a shrine called the Sekanu, okay? Which is Ditnu in a different language. But here's the thing. Guess how many gods were there, if you include Dagon and all of his kids? 70. Okay? So this was done. Sacrifices were offered on the 14th month of what they called the head of the year, or Sagmu. So the 14th. Now remember, the 14th is a date for the Hebrews too, right? The Passover is the 14th. So these sacrifices were made in Syria to their gods. And they sacrificed 70 lambs. Now, if you think about cultural here, what's Satan trying to say? Syria is right above him, okay? His throne was considered in the culture to be on a mountain in Damascus, which is directly north of Mount Zion. Remember, when God talks about Satan and says, you said you would put your throne above mine, he literally does. He just goes north on the map. Syria and Damascus. This is where Baal-Hamon lived. Satan. So they offer 70 lambs. So Satan takes the lamb idiom, which always means the Messiah, right? Known to God, known to matter to God, and has his people sacrifice the animals to him instead. 70 of them. God's total set. Sort of a threat and a thumbing of the nose at God. Before Facebook existed, in this time period, their cultural rituals were their way of social communication. And they would answer each other and they would debate each other with their beliefs. They believed in their gods and they sought to prove that their gods were better than the other people's gods. This included war, but it also included the rituals and the feasts. This was their little social back and forth. So this is not just, oh, that's cute, quaint little way of doing a feast. This is a specific, targeted statement against the Israelites. And since Satan is the one leading the whole parade. Now, so Dagon and his 69 sons got 70 lambs sacrificed to them during a 7-day feast that began on the first month when the moon was full, the same as Sukkot. So it's like our gods, get your people sacrificed to them kind of motif. Huge ego power trip. Okay, what does this matter? Good question. Once I have an answer to that, I'll let you know. So this all ties to one guy, Satan. Over and over and over again, the bull is chosen as a representative in some way, as an authority and a godlike judge and ruler. Over and over again. Why? Why him? Where do they get this fascination? Well, you remember the first appearance of the cherubim was at the garden. Right? The garden, they were put to guard the path. So people knew what they were early on. You have the fall that corrupts mankind. We don't know all the ones that fell, but I guarantee you there were cherubim in there. They knew about them afterwards because the imagery was still around. But Satan, and we'll get to this, he was called the anointed cherub that covers. He was one of them. So why do you think they chose the bull? God has a feast too. It's called Sukkot. Anyone quick with math in that chart will tell you how many bulls were sacrificed in that 7-day total. Guess how many? 70. God answered back. God was answering the beliefs of the people around his people. He was answering by showing in the feast that he is God. And this answer says, I will end you. You 70 bulls, I will end you. I will end you and your leader. This was the social message back to them. Israel was told to be God's representative on earth, right? They were supposed to represent him to all the other nations. They had sanctification rituals and rules that separated them from all the other people. And these rituals not only separated them by keeping the Israelites from practicing the things which were perverted by Satan for his worship, but also answered back to the beliefs of those cultures and pointed to God as the real creator, as the real ruler, as the real source of hope, as the real person in charge of everything, as the one who would reconcile the people to himself. And even in this, it was done. Like how some people think tattoos are banned in the Bible, okay, because of the verse in Leviticus. This was a custom done by the Canaanites, and they marked their bodies for the dead. But what you have to look at is what they did. It wasn't the tattoo that was a problem. In fact, it wasn't a tattoo. It was actually a scarring. They would cut into themselves. And they did this as a marker. Remember, we talked about how they believed in their ancestors having power after they died? They would mark themselves for those ancestors. And they believed that cutting themselves, like cutting the name in, would give them the power, and access to the power that that ancestor now had as a spirit. And this is what they were doing. This is why God banned it. He wasn't banning tattoos as we know them today. That wasn't a thing. What they were doing was trying to gain power from the other side. Something that A, couldn't be done, but B, is pagan, is demonic. And he didn't want it. So they weren't allowed to do it because that's what they do. You don't do that. So this is how they think they gain power. I'm going to show them how to gain power without that. Real power. Your power comes from me. Their power can come from me too. But only if it's clear you're nothing like them. So they answer to these beliefs. Did you know that the creation account is an answer? It's true, but God used it as an answer to the Canaanites. The Canaanites believed, the Phoenicians believed, Mesopotamians, specifically Babylon, believed Marduk was the high god and that he fought Tiamat. Now, Tiamat is a chaos dragon. He represents chaos. What's interesting is this is in the Bible. We call him the Leviathan. You'll find the source words are the same. It means chaos. It even shows up in Genesis. God brings order to the chaos. He does this on purpose. He saw a creation that was in chaos, right? And in the creation, he brings it into order. This is an answer even to them that Marduk is not this guy. Marduk has to struggle through all of time to bring order to chaos, and God says, I did it back then. 1,000 years ago, I already did it. 2,000 years ago, 3,000, whatever. I already did it. I brought order out of chaos. I'm that guy. It was an answer to the social belief, okay? These feasts were meant to do this. God organized them in such an intricate way that not only do they show God, they show who he is, they show the plan of God, they show his love, they show his concern, but at the same time are specifically answering the cultures of the day. And everything Jesus does on earth does the same thing. It's directly opposed to the beliefs of the day. Not just the Pharisees. The Pharisees were more of an annoyance. But he's not only answering their beliefs, but he's also answering the spiritual entities that are pushing these beliefs, because these attacks are not against the people, they're against the spirits. The cherubim end up being the most influential of the heavenly host here on earth, influencing so much that it influences what we believe both directly and indirectly. What Satan has done is to convince the world that he either doesn't exist and therefore isn't much of a threat, so that we just ignore him and his work, or we give him too much credit and we fear power he doesn't even have. We see him in every shadow and we think he's more than he is. And he's good either way. What we don't understand that happened is this corrupts our thinking, even ours in the church. And it creates a classist, racist, born out of evolutionist perspective. And we don't realize how often we do this. It's corrupted our thinking over time. He's effectively corrupted the truth on both sides of the argument. And what's interesting is that if we look at their beliefs and we look at ours, a lot of times people have this automatic perspective, oh, look at what these silly heathens and savages believed. Thank God we have science to tell us the truth. And we do this while also believing that science would never be used against Christianity like that. When we look at beliefs, we can't even see where the truth lies. He's corrupted it so much, you just reject it flat out, so you never see it. And then what he turns around and does is gets us, as Christians, to accept things that were never truth in the first place. We've been played on both sides. See, the truth does exist if you know how to parse through it. If the Holy Spirit guides, the Word is your anchor, and you study, you can find the truth in a lot of things, because Satan can't create a new thing. He can only steal and corrupt what God's already done. He can't create a new idea. Remember the saying, the best lie is at least 10% truth. And sometimes it's 90% truth. We just flip that little 10%. And he's gotten us to ignore truth and to accept untruth. It's an amazing thing. We accept pagan doctrines, teachings, and understandings into Christianity that have no place to ever be there. But that's how flipped the devil has made things. So the truth is hidden, and we're too distracted to ever see it. So, to end for today, this leads to bad misunderstanding about God, about Jesus, about the Holy Spirit, their work, and the life of Christianity within the role of the church. But Galatians 6:7 tells us this: do not be deceived. You know the verse. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, he shall reap. Now, I know the context is about generosity, but you know what Paul is doing? The same thing. He's countering the beliefs of the society that were being taught in the church. Things that, sadly, didn't go away. People still don't grasp this concept today. Or they give it where it doesn't believe. We can see how the devil takes the ideas that God's ordained and created, and corrupts them and ruins them. Things that were even meant to show you about him. Like I showed you with the, what we call the horoscope, but the Mazzaroth originally in Hebrew culture. And in the order, this is what's cool. If you look at those constellations, they were changed in Babylon. The symbols were changed, but the Hebrews had an original version of them. That's why the first one is Virgo. If you go by order of magnitude and put them in order, they tell the story of the gospel. And each tribe was given one of the constellations to sleep under. That's why there's 12. It's not because there's 12 months, it's because there's 12 tribes, and they slept under them. It told the story of the gospel. But Satan perverts it. And then we avoid it. Now, I'm not saying go, try all the pagan things because you'll learn truth. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is his motif over and over and over again. And he can corrupt and mislead humanity and even God's own people if we're not careful. So we have to learn the word. We have to understand it. As boring as that can seem sometimes. We cannot stand for what we do not understand. We can't. We can't believe it if we don't even know it. Sometimes you can be amazed what you assume people understand and believe, and they've never heard it. They've never been taught. Without knowing it, these ideas that have been introduced will corrupt our views and our doctrines over time. We won't have faith in an idea because the idea is false or because we don't even know the idea. How do you have faith in something you don't know about? Because you never take the time to learn it. So we must learn to love the word, to read it, to seek the truth in it, and his will for us in it. What he's trying to say. What is he trying to say? What are these things about? What message is he bringing across? And seeking that and letting it correct us, not the other way around where we try to make it fit our views. Let's stand and sing.